Well, good morning, everyone. We are going to talk today about CSS. Now, we have been using CSS, and I've been warning you about using CSS inline and as part of the head tag, while simultaneously telling you to practice CSS using that. So I've kind of been giving you a couple of conflicting messages. All right, so now today we're going to start to do it right. So let's review. All right, so what is CSS? It stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and I remember when I heard that I thought, what the heck does that mean? But I'm going to explain that all in a minute. Basically, you already know this. It describes how any HTML element should be displayed. So in other words, you control through CSS how any HTML element, like the image tag, does it have a border? Does it have a background color? Does it have padding, etc., etc. You control how that's to be displayed on the screen or any mobile device. Now, HTML provides the structure and CSS provides the style. None of this is new. However, we are finally going to write our CSS the right way, no pun intended. Okay, so there are three types of CSS. We started out using CSS inline or in line with the text of our web page. So in other words, we would say H2 style, etc., and then we would define how that looked. And we also used a little bit of CSS in the head tag. For example, when we styled our table. Guess what? From now on, we will not be doing that, and I absolutely forbid you to do that ever again. So we are going to use CSS as an external file. We are going to use that exclusively. No inline CSS anymore. It is forbidden. No CSS in the head tag. No, no, no. All right, so we're going to write an external CSS file, and what we do is link that in the head tag. Okay, so what's the advantage of doing this? It saves you a lot of time because you can write one style sheet, and that one style sheet covers the whole website, not just one page or one element, but the entire site or multiple sites with one file. And we link it, as I mentioned before, via the head tag. So I'm going to show you an example of that real quick. I have brackets pulled up here. And where are your brackets? There you are. Okay, so this is my index page, and you should recognize some of this. I've added quite a bit of content to it, but let's look here. Remember our head tag, and I said, hey, our head tag holds meta objects like our character set. It holds, right now it's holding the shiv, right, so that we can display our websites in Internet Explorer 9 or lower. It's holding our title, Introduction to Typography, and it's holding link href 4-page website underscore CSS slash styles.css. This code links our HTML to styles.css, which is in the same folder, as I will demonstrate right now. Okay, so I'm going to go to my desktop, and I have, here is my folder, and inside that folder there are images. Whoops, actually that's the wrong folder. Inside my folder we have the images folder, and we have all of our HTML pages loose in the root folder, and additionally we have this little document called styles.css. So our CSS file, you don't have to name it styles.css. If you want to name it anything else you can, as long as you refer to it by the correct name and using the correct link code. Okay, so that file is this. All right, so this looks like a lot, and I'm going to break it down. Let's just look at one CSS rule. So for the entire body of the website that we're working on right now, I've declared the entire body to have a background color of white. So we're used to doing that because we've done it inline and we've done it in the head tag. But this particular file will control all of the pages on my website that have a link to that file. Here's the link. Here's what it's linked to. That is called using CSS the professional way via an external linked document. Okay, and as you can see, I've redefined, this is known as redefining an HTML element or using CSS by element. The element is the body tag or the H1 tag in this case. We have our curly brace, and then we have all the attributes. So we have our color, our font family, our font size. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint here for a minute. What does cascading mean? Okay, I think about cascading. There are a number of different analogies that will work, but one of the analogies that I find helpful is that CSS is like a military chain of command. So some orders have precedence over others. If a general orders you to do something and a sergeant orders you to do something else, you are going to do what the general says, right? So the default here is your HTML, if you don't have any CSS at all, it's going to obey what the user of the user of your website. So whoever is looking at your website in whatever browser they have, it's going to obey the rules that they have set their computer to, either the defaults, which would be black text and blue links, or anything that they've set their computer to. For example, if they need a larger type size, it's going to obey the orders of the user's computer. All right, so next up would be the user's modifications. So for example, if a person required a larger type size. Now, here you are the general, and you, as the author, specify the look and feel. So your external CSS file overrides the default, and it also overrides any user modifications. And I want to add one more thing. Okay, so right now I expressly forbid you to use anything but external CSS, but inline CSS overrules everything. So if you make a mistake and use some inline CSS, it's going to overrule any rules that you have written in your external file, if that makes sense. So we want to make sure that we remove any CSS in the head tag, any CSS that you have inline, because those things are going to overrule the CSS that you have written for an external file. So that may seem a little backwards, but think about it as chain of command. So if you write a rule inline, that's actually the admiral. It overrules everything. If you write CSS in the head tag, it also overrules everything. An external style sheet controls the entire website, but its commands may be overruled by mistakes you've made in your own code. Okay, there are very, very rare occasions when you would want to use inline CSS or CSS in the head tag, as we have been doing. And remember, I said, hey, this is just for practice. We don't do this in the professional world. We use an external style sheet. And that's how I want you to do it. Sometimes, very rarely, you might need to use a little inline CSS, but don't do it. Don't make a habit. Okay? All right. Now, your website gets the reference, it gets the style sheet from a file like I just showed you in your site folder. And that bit of code, as you just saw in brackets, lives in the head tag. So you write your CSS in a separate document, and then you use this link code, modified obviously for the path and the name of your CSS file, in order to link to it. So link relative, quote, style sheet type text / CSS, that's always a part of it. And then href, hypertext reference, equals what the path, whatever the path is, and whatever your name of your style sheet is. If you want to name your style sheet Fred, you can. You know, it's really up to you. As long as you refer to it by the right name, you're good. So, hey, link to a CSS style sheet. Hey, this is what the style sheet is called. All right, so if we put it together, we actually see, let's actually look at this in brackets. So this is what we looked at before. In the index page, here's everything in between the opening and closing head tag. So we have our character set, we have the shiv, we have our title, and then we have link to the style sheet, where to look for it. So mine is the 2 dots denote that it's the desktop, and I have my style sheet in a folder called 4-page website _ CSS, and within that you can find the actual file styles.css. So you can just see that again right here. So 4-page website, it's on the desktop. Within that, it's styles.css. So you have to use the full path to your file. So you can't just go styles.css if it's contained within a folder. And this is why I'm constantly telling you, don't bury your website within a folder, within a folder, within a folder, within a folder, because we have to use that entire path as a reference, and it really gets to be a real pain. So don't do it. Okay, so at this point, we have, let's look at what we've written CSS rules for. So all of that CSS links to and controls every part of this web page. All right, so starting with the very, very obvious, the body, and H1, H2, and H3 tags. I'm getting a red line on H4. I'm going to have to figure that one out. Our P tag. So these are tags that have been redefined, or we can also refer to that as writing CSS by element. In other words, every H1 tag is going to have, on my website, it's going to have a color of dark cyan, it's going to have a font family of Helvetica Serial or whatever, Serial. Okay, you get extra credit for figuring that one out. Helvetica Arial, or whatever sans serif the user has on their computer, and we've defined a font size of 25 pixels. Later, we're going to use M's for this because we want to use responsive design. But the purpose of today's session is really just to teach you how to write CSS in an external file. Every H1 tag on the whole website is going to look like this. Every H2 site, every H2 tag, every H3 tag, every H4 tag, every paragraph is going to have a color of brown, font family of Times Arial or Serif, and a font size of 15 pixels. Okay, this is our list. Remember, I told you I wanted all of your navigation to be created in a list. We're going to look at that in a different session. We're going to look at that navigation in a different session because this is where we get drop-down navigation. So we have the beginnings of that happening here. So don't worry too much about this right now. Just worry about writing CSS rules for the various tags that you want to work with in your website. All right, let's flip back to the PowerPoint and let's remind ourselves of what CSS syntax looks like. We have our selector, the H1 tag, and we have our declaration block or blocks. Each one has a property of color, value of blue, property of font size, value of 12 pixels. So none of this is new. And remember, so here's a default H1 tag with no CSS. And if we redefine that H1 tag, we say it's going to have a color of orange and a text align of center. And in my brackets site here, my H1 tag has a color of dark cyan, it has a font family, and it has a font size. So instead of this default tag, we're going to get what I specify, and you are going to get what you specify. Okay. All right, so guys, there are 3 ways to write CSS. In an external file, we can redefine an HTML tag, and this is what we're going to start with because it's simple. And so you can see in my CSS file right here, I'm just using the HTML tag H1, H2, H3, H4, P, body. And that's the simplest way to start. So that's how I want you to start writing your CSS in a separate file. Just redefine HTML tags. Keep it there for now. All right, there are also 2 other ways to write CSS, using an ID or a class. Okay, now we are going to use IDs and classes later. Please do not use IDs and classes now. Just work with redefining HTML tags. But for the future, so this is the simplest way to write CSS, but sometimes that can be, hey, I mean, what if on one page you would like all of the H1 tags to be green, and if on another page or a different level or in a different article, you want them all to be blue. Well, in that case, you would create what's called a class. Okay, so a class can apply to any object and can be used multiple times. So you would call the class green tag or green text, for example. You can also use an ID. An ID is denoted by the hashtag sign, and it's used for one element that occurs one time. Every element. So let's say, okay, on a page, would you have more than one navigation? Maybe, but probably not at our level. So we can use an ID, so it would look like this. It's the beginning of our rule, right? And our navigation, we're only using it once, and so we're identifying it and writing it for all of the navigational elements in that website. Okay, a class. Now don't let this confuse you because we're not doing it yet. A class, which is denoted by dot, so dot green text, for example, that can apply to any object. If you want the H1 tag to have green text, you would apply the green text class to it. If you want the paragraph tag to have green text, same thing. So it can apply to anything. It can be used multiple times across your website. You can use that class that you write on anything that you want. But we're keeping it simple. Don't get ahead of yourself. We're just redefining HTML tags, or also known as writing CSS based on an element. Do not use classes and IDs right now. They are off limits. No. Okay. So here's the other thing. You may have noticed this. If you have tags that you all want to have the same color or the same font family, you can group them. So H1, H2, H3, H4, we've written a rule that says they all have a font family of Helvetica, Arial, or whatever sans serif is in the user's computer, and they have a font size of 1M. All right, we're going to get to M's later. Don't worry about it for now. So anything that you want to look the same, you can group those. Okay, the other thing is that I do not expect you to memorize every bit of CSS. In fact, CSS is a pretty vast markup language. And I don't expect you to memorize it all. In fact, I don't memorize it all. I use the brackets and I use a reference and I use the brackets code hints. I look them up as needed. HTML you should memorize because it's very short. But all the CSS properties and values, if you really have a memory like a steel trap, you can do that, but I don't expect you to do that. And I don't expect myself to do it either. I happily rely on code hints and I happily rely on CSS references. So here are some nice online CSS references. So this is up on D2L and you can check that out. And this is my favorite one. So I'm just going to put it in the browser here. So here's a nice example of a CSS reference. Okay, so don't worry about pseudo classes right now. We'll get to that later. But so property, it shows you all of the properties. For example, background. If I click on the background property, it shows me everything that I can do to the background. And that's kind of nice. It's, for me, this particular, look at how much we have here. If you really want to memorize it, be my guest. And if you don't, it's totally acceptable to use a reference. So, but every property, if I click on it, every property of display, for example, it's going to show you all of the rules and all of the properties for that display element. Okay, so that's a nice CSS reference. You may like a different one. It's totally up to you. All right, so breaking down this website. Okay, so here's our style sheet. Here's our index page. Let's see what it looks like now. Okay, so here we have, now this is my unordered list. And my CSS, the way you can really see how CSS is working is through the unordered list. But for right now, let's look at how this is marked up. Let's look at the HTML. So I have the header element marked up with an H1 tag, Dr. Lisa Sharp's Introduction to Typography, and then I have the importance of typography in design, and I have an H3 tag. Well, let's take a look at how I don't like this. To me, I need a different level of hierarchy here. So this being an H1 tag and this being an H1 tag is not pleasing to my eye. So I'm going to take a look at my style.css. So H1 has a font size of 25 pixels, and H2 has a font size of 20 pixels. H3 has a font size of 15 pixels. I think I'm going to go back and make this an H2, so it's a little bit smaller. And if it's still not small enough, I'm going to make it an H3. There, that's much better. Okay, so now I have a visual hierarchy. And so you can see this is all marked up using the paragraph tag. Well, I've declared the paragraph tag to have a color of brown in the type, to have a serif font, and to have a font size of 15 pixels. Okay, so this is very simple. I'm actually going to stop here and allow you to write some of your own CSS, and then we're going to come back and we're going to look at how we get this nice looking nav bar here. So that's a little bit more complex. So we'll do that in the next video. All right, guys, have fun.